As promised, I want to give you some of the behind the scenes that I do in terms of wildlife photography, video captures, in general travels. And one of the things that is really important is my health and my physical stamina. In the future, I'll be doing videos related to wildlife in terms of like understanding the time of the season, understanding the behaviors of various species, understanding what an ethical line would be if you ever are fortunate enough to track and research wildlife, understanding that keeping your own safety at the foremost, that is the most important thing. Next is not compromising the safety of the animal. And then next would be understanding that anything that you do should not be curtailing or modifying the behavior of the animal that was already in play when you first saw and approached the wildlife. So making sure that they maintain their same behavior is absolutely critical. If at any point in time you alter that behavior, I think that's a moral line that you just cannot cross. But back to the topic of this particular video, we'll be talking about how important my health is and my stamina in terms of getting to places and seeing things that a lot of other people don't have the opportunity to see. So when I was really, really young in Washington State, I was climbing mountains all the time. I lived near the North Cascades Mountains, and sometimes by myself, which isn't the safest thing to do, but I was in such good health and understood the black bear in the area and the mountain lion so well that I felt confident in doing so. But then most of the time I was actually with people. And so from the age of as early as 13, 14, maybe even younger, I was already running up trails and exploring wildlife like crazy. So I understood how important it was to have my physical health at its peak. And at that time, it was quite easy. I was much younger and I was very active playing sports and such. And so, yeah, running up the mountains was an easy thing for me to do. And it's not that running in particular is important. For example, if you ever come across a mountain lion or cougar, that would be the worst thing you could do is run. Absolutely the worst thing. So just because you can run isn't the important thing here. It's understanding that even in a situation like that, being able to control your breath and demonstrate a certain body language to the animal that's necessary for that situation as you size up that animal and understand how to respond and react to it to keep yourself and the animal safe, it's important. If you're out of breath, huffing and puffing, and you can barely just walk and you're dizzy and you're nauseous, how can you actually do what you need to do in that moment to protect yourself? Safety aside, how can you even get to situations where you can actually observe wildlife if your physical limitations don't let you do that, or if you put yourself in situations where you could injure yourself? One thing that on a recent trip I took to the Himalayas, one thing I learned was just the importance maybe of something like yoga. And so I've been heavily into yoga since then, every day practicing some beginner yoga routines and approaches, because flexibility and control of breathing becomes so important. And when I was in the Himalayas, that was absolutely critical. I'll get to that in a minute. So in the past, my first exposure to being outdoors and being healthy was just for trekking, just for fun. I've trekked mountains all across the world, from Italy, Mount Etna, to Malaysia, Kinabalu, to Tanzania, Kilimanjaro, to the Tatra Mountains in Poland, to the Tian Shan Mountains in Kazakhstan, and of course in my own backyard in America. But beyond that, I've hiked many, many places all throughout the world and just love nature in general. And if I wasn't physically fit, eating right, sleeping right, working out, etc., I just wouldn't be able to experience this world, experience nature in the way that I've been fortunate enough to experience. So as I started to shift to wildlife as an interest, not just hiking, I found that I gradually moved from, like most of us, being curious in a zoo and seeing zoo animals, to then moving from that to safaris. And safaris were fine. And I find now that safaris are quite boring to me, and I'll kind of lay out that evolution of how that happened. But first, I want to briefly talk a little bit off topic, but I think it relates to this, and I'll do a separate video about this in the future. So many people have said, when you have the camera in your hands, how can you be focused on the moment? How can you enjoy the moment? How can you just take it all in? It's really too bad that you have a camera in your hand. And I totally understand the perspective. I totally get it. And there are times when I do put the camera down and just breathe and observe and soak in everything that I'm experiencing in that moment. But it's a different kind of experience. It's a different kind of absorbing of the moment when I have the camera in my hand. And the analogy that I use is something like this. When you go to see a play, you can sit in the audience and watch, passively sitting back and taking it all in. It's an aesthetic experience. All of your senses, maybe not taste, but all of your senses are just lit up and taking it in. It's fantastic. Also, there are actors on the stage who are performing in the moment, and they're producing the content that is being enjoyed by the audience. I would say that they are also fully engaged in the moment, even though they're active participants in it. And that's what happens for me. For me, when I have a camera, suddenly a whole new world of participation opens up. I'm no longer merely passive. Now I'm thinking about lighting, sound, framing, like compositional rules. I'm thinking about telling a story. I'm thinking, what is the story? I know something about this species, this leopard. What is it right now in this moment, at this time of day, in this particular part of the landscape that I would be looking for to capture? And I wait for it, and then I capture it, and I tell a story. I'm an active participant. I'm a storyteller when I'm on safari. I'm thinking about things like wind. I'm thinking about things like making sure that I'm getting away from other tourists and there's not a huge queue of jeeps to see an animal. I'm thinking about so many things. I'm thinking about being patient. So many people are not patient. I might sit there for 6 hours waiting for a behavior that I know that's coming based on my research. And in that time, so many tourists come and go looking at this animal. And so for them, it's a passive experience. So if there's nothing happening, they just leave. Whereas me, I'm actively involved in the storytelling and engaging with this wildlife. And so, yes, there are times when I put the camera away and I just passively enjoy. And then there's other times where I grab the camera and I am so actively engaged in the story. And so I want to caution people who are immediately just critiquing people with the camera saying, they aren't enjoying the moment. That's too bad for them. They're just enjoying it in a different way. And those of us who enjoy it in that way, in some cases, it's even overwhelming. There's almost too much to be thinking about and to take in the moment. Anyway, I digress. That point aside, I want to go back to health. So when I moved from safaris to suddenly my health being important as it relates to wildlife was when I went to Belarus. I lived there for 3 years, and in the Naliboki forest, I was doing wolf research with a zoologist, Vadim Sidorovich, and his zoologist wife, Irina. And wow, there's just amazing work that I was able and privileged to do with them. Down in the description, I'll include all the different links to the videos. Some, and definitely not all, but some of the trips that I did there, I would take colleagues there, I would take students on wolf research trips. I would do trips on my own. And the projects would range from studying lynx, actually, and wolves, studying wolf breeding behaviors, checking camera trap data, checking marking behaviors, checking territorial information, counting the species numbers in packs, etc. And so that getting out of the Jeep and walking and understanding how to respect nature and how to not impact a species of animal and be with it in nature and remain safe, there was nothing like it. And I'm almost ruined for safaris now that I started down that path. And here in Ethiopia, I've had that experience, been able to do that even further. But Belarus was the first situation that sort of opened my eyes. And so, here was the deal. If we were gonna go collect camera trap data, in order to get to that camera trap, you could just walk the road through the forest or walk an easy path. But then poachers and other individuals who might intend harm on animals could follow us. And so it was critical that we actually had no one ever follow us. And so we would not take the path of least resistance, quite the opposite. So there's an easy path, we take the swamp path. So with taking that path of least resistance, it was so critical to have that physical stamina. I mean, you had to go through swamps for 12 hours a day. You had to push through full thickets of bushes and thorns and just push right through. And so I learned very, very quickly while doing that kind of work that if you're going to be in the field, if you're going to be trekking and tracing and studying and researching wildlife, it's a whole new level of physical fitness that you need in order to make that successful. And so, and the degree to which you have better and better physical health and stamina, the degree to which you can go to even more challenging trips. And so here in Ethiopia, I've had similar experiences. I've been able to go into extreme heat, go on sheer cliffs, trek and find and spot and study lions, the black maned lion here in this country, caracals, looking for leopards, haven't found them, the Ethiopian wolf, and the gelato baboon. The gelato baboon, I was able to get up really, really early, 3 a.m., get up onto the cliffs, be in the habitat where they're at without disturbing them, and actually photograph them as the sun's coming up on sheer cliff sides. And if I didn't have the physical stamina needed for that, obviously it wouldn't have happened. So I'm able to get certain shots a lot of people don't have because they're limited by their physical inabilities, limitations, and lack of health. Recently in the Himalayas, I learned this even more. I learned how important yoga is to breathing, regulating my breath when I'm on the sheer cliffs in the Himalayas. I understood how important it was to have physical stamina. We're talking minus 30, minus 25, minus 30 possibly at certain days, especially adding the wind chill factor in the Himalayas. And every day, hours and hours and hours of trekking. And so I had to be in tip-top shape to be able to get close to snow leopards and to track them and understand their behavior, understanding their habitat, understanding their zones, understanding all of that, how they hunt prey. I had to be able to physically get into the space with them. So one interesting story while being in the Himalayas was the first day was really difficult. I was in shape already, but the elevation, the sheer cliffs, I was constantly out of breath. By the end of the trip, I was starting to feel a lot better and a lot more like I could handle trekking through the mountains because we were doing it every day. On that 10th day, we actually saw a snow leopard, my partner and I. It was my partner and I and 2 guides. And so there were just 4 of us. There were 1 or 2 other tourists, but they really weren't out in the field very often. So without a lot of tourists around, we were actually able to, with the guidance of our guides, get out and closer into nature and climb into the Himalayan mountains without disturbing nature, without disturbing the wildlife, which was a fantastic part of the trip. So on that last day, we saw a snow leopard, but it's so far away that even my zoom camera couldn't capture it. And so the guide said, would you like to track the animal and go up into the mountains further and see if we could get a closer view? And absolutely, and this is probably one of my favorite experiences ever of my life in terms of wildlife. It was just unbelievable to be able to grab all our gear and go trekking. And there's no way I could have handled it if I wasn't in good shape. I even got a mild a mild case of frostbite on all my fingertips. They ended up blistering, and layers and layers and layers kept peeling away in the next 2 months. It took quite a while for them to heal. I got feeling back about 2 weeks later, maybe 3 weeks later, before I got feeling back in my fingertips. So it was really physically demanding, but it was one of the best experiences of my life, and I was in shape to do it. So all that to say, what do? Well, I eat right. I have good sleeping habits, especially when I'm in the field. Depending on my goals, I might sleep during the day with the animals. Depends on my purpose. If I'm just collecting research and data, I need to be awake during the daytime in many cases, and so I might sleep normal hours during the night. But anyway, you might change your circadian rhythms with the wildlife depending on how things go and what your purpose is. Make sure you get enough sleep, eating. In the future, I'll have some examples of what I eat and the focus for me, but everybody's diet is different. Everybody does things differently. Just make sure that you're developing a diet for yourself that will keep you at optimal health. And then physically, I work out often and do yoga, and that's because I gotta protect my Achilles tendons, my calves, my knees, my quads, my hamstrings. I gotta make sure that all of this can take me to the places I wanna go, into these elusive spots to see wildlife. So it's really, really important to build up that muscle mass, to protect your body and make sure that you are well equipped physically for these kinds of trips. Upper body strength is important for taking in and trekking in your equipment, all that camera equipment if you are bringing some in. So for me, it's a regular part of my regimen behind the scenes to make sure that I'm physically fit. And so a lot of people might look at my photos and videos and go, oh, that's really cool, but they don't understand everything that goes in behind the scenes to make sure that I can actually get to that spot. You know, being in freezing rain for 6 hours, waiting for a wolf for 14 hours without moving in a ghillie suit. Maybe sometimes waiting in some places overnight, multiple days, looking for an animal in a hide. So the amount of sacrifice and work it takes is paramount, it's huge. And understanding that is so important. So, especially now in these times with COVID-19, guys, it's so critical that you are healthy, that you are strong, that you are making good decisions about your body. And if you're a wildlife photographer, you're into wildlife or capturing videos about wildlife or just traveling in general, your health is so critical. Make it a priority for you. And maybe one of these times you can join me on one of my trips.